want to fend for myself, and I want to build people up for them to fend for themselves. Hey everybody, Clark Fredericks back with you for another edition of the Free Like Me podcast. Guests come on, speak their truth, leave that shame and pain behind, and leave free like me. I'm honored to do this for my guests and for you, the audience, to get strength from hearing fellow survivors and to have my guests free themselves when they come in here, and when they leave, they should be lighter and leave their baggage behind. If you are interested for a coaching program, you can reach out to me privately on my website, clarkfredericks.com, and set up a coaching conference call with me. And coming this spring / summer will be my book, Scarred, with Simon & Schuster Publishers. So stay tuned for that. And this week, I am honored to have Kate flew in from Atlanta, Georgia with her husband. And we are here for her to talk about her childhood. She heard me on Instagram speaking fluently about the pain I endured, and she reached out to me privately and said, I'm ready to rid myself of this crap I've been carrying around. So I am honored to have her here. So thank you for tuning in. Kate, my dear, thank you for coming.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm here.
You heard my intro. I want guests to free themselves. The shame like we carry from our abuse, it always is eating at us. And, it's horrible that the abuser doesn't have the shame. It's us, the victim, that's left with it. And, I just try to provide a safe place for people to rid it, instead of it just secrets kill us. And I hope you're, ready to rid yourself of secrets and to leave your shame behind, because we shouldn't carry the shame.
No, we shouldn't. I actually, I saw your video online recently, and what caused me to reach out to you was because I had this epiphany that I'm ready to just let it go. I've carried it with me for so long, everything that I've been through, and very few people have known what's happened to me throughout my life, and I've just always wanted to get it out there. Not more or less just to put my business out there necessarily, but more or less so that others that have possibly been through what I've been through or something similar, and they're struggling as well, to give them a sense of hope that they can get through that. So,
right.
And I thought this would be a great opportunity.
Yeah, well, from me speaking out, it's caused you to speak out. And from you speaking out, it'll cause the next person to speak out.
Yeah.
It's a domino effect.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's, I don't have right now the largest platform, but it's growing, and it's just I think people respect where I've been and where I've come from, and they just want to do the same thing for themselves and for the next person. And that's, giving back. Giving back is how you really heal, when you can help someone else overcome their darkness. That's really when you take your healing to another level.
Yeah, and I think it speaks a lot of volumes that, you're, as a male, when you come out and you speak about what you've been through, because, and I used to work, as a sexual assault response coordinator in the military, and one of the things that I noticed was that a lot of the men don't really come forward and speak about what they've been through, and what you're doing is not just helping, people who have been in that situation, but men especially who are just so afraid of being ostracized and, feeling emasculated or
Right.
things like that. So
yeah, I'm not downplaying what women go through
Sure.
at all, but I think when it's male on male, it's just tougher for the guys to speak out about it. They're worried about their masculinity. They're worried about, will they be seen as gay?
Yeah.
And I struggled with just inferiority complex and self-loathing and self-hatred. And, my mind said we are going to sleep with as many women as we can, and that'll make us manly.
Right.
And it doesn't work. You become an empty shell that way.
And I think as a woman, a lot of us become promiscuous, but I think a lot of it's more about taking back control as well.
Exactly.
Too.
Right.
Right.
It's a twofold thing,
Sure.
Right. we had our boundaries stripped away from us, and uh, our sexuality was invaded, and we want to be in control of that, so yeah, it's definitely being promiscuous is part of taking back control of your body.
Correct. That's something that my therapist told me, was that when in my situation, specifically with my father, when someone is supposed to set those boundaries for you, protect you from the monster and the bad guy, and then they become the bad guy, then you don't trust anybody or anything. And
Right.
there's no boundaries
Right.
because you don't know them. So,
Exactly. And I mean, that's, I always talk about right after my abuse, like my boundaries just got stripped away. Like just drugs instantly
mhm.
came into the picture, and then it just went from there.
It's like, well, if I can go through this, I can go through this, and why not?
Yeah.
And you test those limits because, and at least for me, and I have to keep repeating this for myself. I can only speak for
Right.
myself, but I know for me, I tested those limits just to see how far I could go because, not to say I wanted to die, but when you get that close to death, you almost feel alive.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to explain that any other way, but that's kind of where I was pushing myself to those limits to feel alive.
Right.
So,
Yeah. I had one of the major mob families in New York put a hit out on my life for gambling debt.
okay.
And it's not that I wanted to die, but it was just like, I was just like, whatever, dude. Like, you're gonna kill me. You know what's already been done to me. You'd be doing me a favor.
Yeah.
Go ahead, put me out of my misery. Not that I was asking for death,
Mhm.
but you just, like you say, you get to that precipice, and it's just it energizes you in a way. Like, when you come close to death.
Yeah. That's also why a lot of soldiers, when they come back from deployment, they seek that adrenaline rush because they experience those near death experiences. So it's like that adrenaline. It's like I don't know, it makes them feel alive. And as toxic as that may be with what we put ourselves through and what we do, I think what I've learned through therapy was to just try to find different ways to feel alive that were healthy, so that I wasn't putting myself in these situations that potentially became a threat to me, or a danger. So,
I had a ex-Marine buddies with, and he's retired cop, retired professor, and I forget the name of the show, but he watched a show, and it was on Navy SEALs, and he's like, "Are you aware how many Navy SEALs were abused as children?" I was like, "No," and he's like, "Yeah," and he's like, and they go into that career like, to be this badass, guy, and it distances them from their pain. They're outrunning their pain, and then when their career's over, like, they've never addressed their issues, and a lot of them commit suicide. And he's like, he goes, it was like looking at your life, in this movie. He's like, all of them suffer the same way.
correct. And it's that elevation of your cortisol levels, and then they drop, and then they go up, and they drop, and eventually you create this chemical imbalance within your own brain, and so you're constantly seeking that next, adrenaline rush. And so again, like when you retire, like when I retired, that's when I actually sought therapy for myself. When I went through intensive outpatient program was at the end of my career in the military, because I was being faced with this: my whole life is going to change, and it's going to come to a halt. It's going to stop, and I'm not going to have this constant distraction that I've been doing in the military. And so, I realized that I was coming face to face with the reality of what I've been through in my past, and I asked for help. I mean, I was suicidal at that point, but like I was very similar to what you're explaining from what you've heard.
Yeah.
I was faced with that myself.
The guest whose podcast is airing now, Serena, um, you know, her boundaries were stripped away from age 3 on, and then she's like, she's thought she had this beacon above her that just said, I'm ripe for the picking, so, and then it just became one abuse after another. And when you've had those boundaries stripped away, and when all you've known early on is chaos and destruction, it's like that becomes your norm, and that's where you're you're comfortable living, and like, and from what you've told me, that followed you on and on and on, especially, you had multiple things in the military occur to you after your childhood stuff.
Yeah. In the therapy, I know we've talked about it a little bit, but intensive outpatient program, which is what I went through. And in that program, we had to create, which was like a loss history graph. So you had to, it's like a timeline of these events, traumatic events that have happened to you where you've lost something, you've experienced grief. And you have to start from your first conscious memory. And my first conscious memory, I believe is a couple of them, but one for sure is my fourth birthday party. I do remember everybody singing happy birthday for me, and it was my fourth birthday party. And then I remember within a very short period after that is when the first time my father had sexually abused me. And that's how I was able to sort of correlate that timeline for me is when all that happened. And then when my mom was going to college and stuff like that, because I had a lot of questions after later on in life with my mom, why were you not home? Where were you during that time? And then she was like, oh, I was in college. So anyway, I created that loss history graph, and that was my first conscious memory for sure, and to current time. And then you just had to write everything. And then within those events, you had to draw a line, and that line represented how awful that experience was for you. And I found that the loss of my father, meaning like when he sexually assaulted me, to the loss of my grandmother was almost equal as far as the pain that I felt. So I actually had to process both of those situations. But, um, experiencing that at such a young age, I was developing these maladaptive behaviors where I felt like I was constantly feeling on the defense and feeling like I had to protect myself. And I thought that when I would leave home and join the military, I just, never have to see him again. I thought that that would end for me. And then, of course, I got in the military, and within a short period of time, I was sexually assaulted in the military. Then I felt I wasn't safe at all,
Right.
and now I really need to protect myself, and everybody's a threat and everything is bad. So I was just doing all kinds of, things that were not good for me, and getting into fights too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
lots of fights. I broke my hand a couple times. I was fighting men.
Really?
Yes.
I was
I
just going to ask you,
Yeah,
who were
no,
you
I
fighting?
was fighting men. I very
Wow.
rarely did I fight women.
Wow.
Of course I'm almost 6 foot tall, and yeah, but with guys I just felt always threatened by them. So I would my response would be physical. So yeah.
Well, I mean, we've sort of just, started chipping at the iceberg.
Sure.
So let's get into it. Were your parents both in the military?
Yes.
So,
Not at the time when that happened, but yes, they met. Well, my dad was older than my mother, much older, and then she joined the Marine Corps, so they were both in the Marines, and then she eventually got out after about 6 or 7 years.
okay. So your first memory of your father abusing you was your fourth birthday?
Yes.
And like, can you explain what happened? Like, what did he
Sure.
do? And where was it long after the birthday party was over, or?
So it wasn't like right after the birthday party that I do know, but I remember my dad had to pick me up out of bed. I was sleeping, and I remember he woke me up, and my mom, just before that, my mom had given me a kiss goodbye. I remember she was like, I love you. I'm going to get going. I'll be home soon, or whatever. It was something along those lines. And I vaguely remember she was saying goodbye. So she wasn't home. And then I fell back asleep. And then my dad came in and woke me up. And I remember he picked me up and carried me. And so I was small enough for that. And then he carried me into the bathroom, and like I can still remember everything, smell, the way it looks, every part of that moment I can remember, even though I was probably 4 or 5
Right.
maybe. My birthday's on Christmas, so I think I was about 4. Um, and I just remember, and it's okay if I talk about this. Like,
Yeah,
okay,
absolutely.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I remember he like took my underwear off, and I remember he had set me on the bathroom counter, and my feet were like dangling. And I just remember being like kind of confused. I didn't know what was going on. And I remember asking him, Daddy, what are you doing? And I remember he told me, shh, like, you need to know this when you're an adult, and don't tell your mom. Um, After that moment, and he would just, initially it started with he would like or do things orally. And that's how he started. And then it sort of
Doing oral to you?
oral to me. And then it progressed to me being forced to do oral on him.
Right.
And then it turned into sodomy and
Vaginal or anal?
anal.
Anal?
Yeah.
At that young age?
Yes.
I've heard, so many, so many, I mean, I just interviewed this girl, Heidi, and like, same thing, her mother's boyfriend, like, just anally raped him. Never vaginal, just anal.
I do remember the first time he tried that. And there was a party at the house, and there was a bunch of Marines at the house. And he was like I believe a sergeant first class or some, or well, E7 at the time. I'm pretty sure it was a senior NCO. And it was a huge party. There's speakers. I remember that he had just gotten these huge speakers from the pawn shop. Don't ask me. I just remember these little details about it. And it was just really loud. And there was just all kinds of Marines through our house. And I'm assuming because it was so loud and there was so much distraction, that was his ability. I don't know. And he was a drunk, so he was an alcoholic. And I remember he took me to the bedroom. I remember the bedroom door was opened. His bedroom door. He took me to his room, our parents' room, and I remember he forced me to like sit on him, and he was like putting himself into me, and I remember screaming, and I remember being in so much pain, and he got mad at me because I was in so much pain, and he eventually shoved me off of him and told me to get out of there. And I felt it was, as a child, like it's really hard to express like how it feels when your parent is violating you like that, and they're supposed to be your daddy.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be somebody you can go to when you're scared, when you're afraid, and when you're hurting. And when that person violates you in that way, you feel so like lost and confused. Who do I go to? I can't go to my mom.
If you have somebody outside the family who's doing something that's not right to you, who do you feel safe going to?
Correct.
Your father's anally raping you. Like, who are you supposed to go to?
I just didn't know who and with my memory, he always came off as like a very like strong, and everybody loved him. Everybody thought he was attractive. Everybody thought he was one of the best Marines. He was just that guy that everybody thought was so perfect. And it was just so, I remember this. I remember all these things about him. And I just remember feeling so terrified. I remember thinking he was willing to go to, because it started off with like him doing things to me orally and making me do things to him orally, where it was grotesque and disgusting. And I remember not wanting to do it and feeling sick to my stomach. But this was a whole nother level. Like this was like absolute pain, excruciating. And I remember
I
thinking,
mean, just, a little 4-year-old being anally invaded. I mean,
yeah,
it's just like it doesn't. It almost seems like the square peg going into the round hole. It wouldn't fit.
yeah.
Like
It's hard to imagine. I know you understand where I'm coming
yeah.
from on that. And it's all I could think of was just get through it. Just get through it. And don't complain.
And he swore you to secrecy with your mother.
Yeah, he basically told me that he would hurt my mother. So there was that fear of him hurting
Had
her.
he ever been violent with
Oh, he
her?
beat her. Beat
Oh,
her all the
oh,
time in front of
really?
me. I remember my mom was holding my brother. He was just a little baby. And I remember him kicking her through the door, the hallway door, when she was holding my brother. He used to beat her bad. And he used to kick us too. He was very physically violent. He was verbally violent. He was sexually violent. I mean, he was just violent all around. And he, later on in life, I had found out that he had been brought up on accusations while he was a Marine for raping another female Marine, him and another guy. And I guess nothing came of that. They just moved her, they transferred her. He also had a babysitter. She was 16 years old. And I found out that like he licked her back when she was laying out in the sun tanning watching us, and he showed up at the house early, and then he walked up behind her and he just got down and licked her. um there's just so many incidents. And then of course he's been married 4 times. He's beat on all of his wives. His first
Oh.
wife was not my mother. um I do this because there's a whole other story there, but she had daughters before him. So Later on, when I was as an adult, I found out that I had a brother that he had a child with and his first wife. When I finally made communication with my brother, my initial thing I told him was, I'm just letting you know now, I don't talk to our dad, and this is why, right? So I told him, and he was really quiet on the phone. And he said, I said, what's wrong? And he said, I just feel terrible right now. I said, well, why do you feel terrible? He goes, I've never met my father before because he had abandoned his first kid. And he said, my sisters told me my whole life growing up that my dad sexually abused them.
Well,
And he said, I thought that they just told me that because they just didn't want me to like my dad. So hearing it from me
yeah, just
confirmed
confirmed.
that, so he's actually been doing these things for a long time, and he continued to do them after me too.
Yeah, I mean the predators. I just you might have saw on Instagram. I interviewed the prosecutor in my case and asked him, can pedophiles be rehabilitated? And he's like, the stats really don't show, any major work when they've been in treatment. It's just,
Yeah. So,
so they just continue and continue and continue.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this started at 4,
Mhm.
and how long did it go on for?
I was about 11, I think. I remember I was around middle school age or junior high age.
So you had a 7 years of hell.
Correct. It was worse when he was single, like in between his marriages,
So when did your parents get divorced?
when I was 7.
So 3 years after he first, that you can recall.
Oh,
He might have been doing stuff when you were an infant,
it was
touching you.
awful for me when I was in 3rd grade. That was the worst for me. I had to live with my dad because my mom divorced him and she was being abused, but my mom didn't know what was going on with me. She was just trying to escape his abuse and try to get on her 2 feet. So she left us in Virginia and went back to California to get on her 2 feet. She took my little brother, my youngest brother, and left me and the middle-aged kid, my brother, with my dad.
Not knowing anything at all
I remember
had been going
watching
on
her.
between you two.
No, I remember watching her drive away. I remember just praying that she wouldn't leave me.
Oh, that had to be horrible.
Oh,
Now you're being left with the devil.
it was awful. He used to have to start to bribe me. And I know that sounds terrible. Um, I'd come home from school. I wouldn't be allowed to play outside with my friends. He would put the desk up in his bedroom, up at the window, so I could see the kids playing outside. And he would tell me to do my homework there. And he would say, well, you know what you need to do if you want to play with your friends. So he would force me, and
Meaning sexually with him?
sexually, yeah,
If
but
you want to go outside and
oral
play.
sex and stuff. And it just got to the point where he was just pushing more and more limits on that. And then he had a friend who he hung out with a lot. And I remember I had to go to the bathroom and I was like holding myself and I needed to go to the bathroom. And his friend stopped me and grabbed me in my private area and held on to me and said, that's bad for you. You shouldn't grab yourself there. And I just remember thinking like he's doing this too.
This guy
that my dad was hanging out with. Shortly after that happened, I guess this guy convinced my dad to have me do like a movie. And I got picked up one day by this guy, and there was other kids in the car, and they took us to this remote location. And I vaguely remember, how we got there and where it was and all that. I just remember it was really remote. And I remember he tried to tell us that he was creating a video for college or for school. And he had like all these professional, like cameras and everything. I remember it was very professional. Like he had the lights and everything. And he would make me make out with boys and like record me, um, stuff, stuff like that. So, and it was,
clothes on.
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember. I just remember being like I was a 3rd grader and I was being forced to like make out like an adult with these children, boys my age.
Were they
They were
8,
all
9
they
your
were all
age?
kids, yeah. And I just remember thinking this was so like wrong. So wrong. Why am I doing this? But he kept trying to tell us like this is for school. This is for my project. This is what we're doing. Um My dad used to
And was your
have,
dad there with him?
no, but my dad, I remember I was cleaning the house one day and I went in his room to clean and I was curious. I wanted to see what was in his closet and I found a briefcase and it was full of just the worst type of pornography you could think of. Very abusive to people and children and stuff. And I sort of correlated what had been going on with me in this filming thing to that maybe my dad was involved in more stuff like child pornography type things. Um, yeah, he used to make me give him oral pleasure when we were in the car driving. Make my brothers were in the back seat. My brother, he would, and they would be like, he'd have like this car with like this big partition thing in the middle, and he'd like make me do it right there.
They couldn't see with this
Mm-mm.
partition thing up.
No, they were really little, and so I was little. But he would make me do it on anytime we'd have to drive anywhere. He'd make me do that.
And didn't you tell me like you wanted a bike
Yeah,
at what?
Yep, I wanted a bike at Toys R Us or whatever, and he would take me into a toy store, and he'd say, "What do you want?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I want this bike and like this toy," and then he'd say, "Well, you know what you have to do," and then he'd have like a bag of change in the car, and it would be like filled with like nickels, dimes, and quarters or whatever pennies, and he'd say, "Well, if you want this money to get that bike, you know what you have to do." And so he would just make me do a lot of things for him. And it's
Would
great.
he have a value like oral? All right, oral, you get this much, and anal, you get this much.
No,
And
I think it was just a form of manipulation for him. It was just, I didn't understand change in money and at that age, like how that all calculated. I think I just knew that was money and that money could get me what I needed. Or not needed, as a kid, I wanted a
yeah,
bicycle,
yeah, yeah.
and so, yeah, he just used it to manipulate me. And I was too young to really understand what was really happening. And, but he knew that that was just the next technique or the next tool that he used to get what he wanted from me. And as I got older and older, it became more difficult. But the last time it happened, I was about 11-ish, middle school. And he was married at the time with his third wife. She had two boys. One was my age. We were both born the same year, within the same month, December. And he was in the closet. I didn't know he was in the closet, in our bedroom closet. We shared a room. I didn't know he was hiding in the closet. And my dad came in the room and I stood up and he came up to me and he gave me a hug. And it's usually how he would like start. Like he would hug me and I just stand there and I could feel him erected. And he pressed himself against me. And I remember pushing him off of me and saying, "Stop, stop it." And I said, "No." And he backed up. And that was the last time he just looked at me and was like, "Okay." And he walked away. And that was the last time that he ever tried anything with me. And I heard my brother in the closet go, "I understand."
Meaning,
I was like, 11. I didn't know. I didn't bother to ask him. Fast forward 2 years ago, he died. Um,
that brother.
he ended up getting at a very young age, I guess, from what I heard from my half sister, that he was at Boy Scouts and he had been sexually assaulted a lot and by a leader, Boy Scout leader or something. And it messed him up really bad. And so at a very young age, he was involved in drugs and alcohol. He went down a really bad path. He ended up going to prison. And when he came out, I think within a few days of him getting out of prison a couple years ago, year and a half ago, he died, overdose.
So when he said, "I understand," because of what he was
Sure.
dealing with in the Boy Scouts.
I know now that's what it was.
Right, right. It, I mean, for people who had a normal upbringing, like to hear like if you wanted a bike, you have to go blow dad X amount of times to get a bike. They just can't wrap their head around it. It's like right now, I just like it's like it makes you just
It's disturbing.
yeah, just I
Well, I have children, right? So like I remember my daughter specifically. She was 4 years old. Mm. And she was getting a bath. She was three, I think 3-ish years old. My husband was giving her a bath. I came home from work. Triggers. Okay. So this was what I had to work through, and I still have to work through these things in my
What'd you
life.
do? Scoop her up out of the tub
I
and
got home and I saw him giving her a bath, and he was, as a dad, washing her, washing her. And I immediately went back in time, and I grabbed my husband and I started hitting him. And my husband grabbed me by my
is
hands,
this your
and
husband
my
now?
husband now, and he
Okay.
held on to me and he said, honey, I'm not him. I'm not
Oh,
hurting her.
you had already
He
shared?
knew I was having a
Okay.
trigger. Oh yeah, my husband's known from the very beginning. And he just held on to me and he's like, honey, it's okay. It's me. It's me. I'm not him. And I broke down and cried. And it's like, I don't think people quite understand like how those triggers, to this day, I can go into Walmart and I can see a dad holding on to his daughter just a little too close. And she looks like she's uncomfortable. And I'm standing there like almost like dissociative. Like I'm this little girl again who's not wanting my dad to touch me because he creeps me out.
Right.
Even though that may not even be the case at all. But I find myself struggling daily with triggers. And so I've had to like, that's where when I was younger, that's where I was like leaning on alcohol and drugs and being unhealthy with my life and making really poor decisions on like numbing that pain. But now I have to find those healthy ways. And so I've come a long way.
I mention it in my speeches, like pedophiles have to initiate touch at some point. And to the normal person, a little tussle of the hair is meaningless.
Yeah.
But for a predator slash pedophile, that's their initial touch. Like, oh, just a little tussle of the hair. And, my guy used to tussle hair. So, like, you see a father holding a daughter close and it triggers you. I see somebody tussle hair and I just want to go
Don't touch
rip
them.
their arm off.
Yeah. Like stop that.
Yeah.
Even though it's probably harmless because most people, and I see how my husband interacts with
I
his
hope,
kids.
but there's enough
Sure.
animals out there that some aren't.
Sure. And that's also something I think I've had to struggle with is not being so cynical. Because I remember when I first was like, I need help. I'm gonna kill myself. Like I can't do this anymore. Nightmares, everything. I remember my therapist asked me, she said, how do you see the world? And I said, what do you mean? And she says, do you think the world is good, bad? And I said, oh, it's bad. Bad. She said, really? I said, yeah, everything is bad. I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anything. Once I went through this intensive outpatient program and I went through treatment, I found that now I don't see the world like that. And I do struggle sometimes, but for the most part, I feel positive that like most people are not going to do those things to their children. Um, but that's been years and years of therapy.
So things end at 11 with
Yep.
your father sexually.
Yes.
And what kind of high school student are you going into high school with having all this trauma done from 4 to 11? Do you struggle with grades, with sports, with drugs, with alcohol? When does that come into your life?
Yes. So my freshman year of high school, I failed, I believe, like every class minus 2 classes. I started smoking weed when I was 13.
Yeah.
And I remember the first time I tried it, I remember thinking, oh, wow, like this stuff is great.
Yeah.
And I feel so good. It was like mind numbing. It was just like, I don't feel the fears that I have. I also became manipulative and more vocal about how I felt about things. I felt like at that age I was too mature. I was like trying to protect myself to an extent that it was becoming manipulative.
Did you know? I mean, at what point did you know what was going on was wrong, or didn't you? Or like, if this is starting at 4 and it's your father, I mean, it would be tough to like all of a sudden be like, oh, this isn't normal, or when did that, like, I mean, I know stuff didn't feel right, obviously getting anally raped didn't feel right, but how did you come to terms like with this being right or wrong, and when?
So, because my parents were split, I spent the majority of my time with my mother during the school year and the summers with my dad. So, because I was around my mom, who was a very strong minded, independent woman, and, I was surrounded by, it was a little chaotic. Okay. I'm not going to say it was perfect. There was some trauma there, but she was very strong minded. So I learned how to speak up, and I learned how to get my voice, and I learned what was right and wrong and things like that.
So just
However,
hold on a second. So she went to California when they split up. You got left behind. So
yep.
now you just said she has you most of the year and then he has you in the summer. When did that
So
start to change?
he only had me for the third grade, and then I moved to California after that. So then I would only see my father in the summers.
When you were living in California away from your father, you still couldn't tell her what had
Oh,
happened.
I couldn't tell her. My mom, if you've ever met my mother, you'd know she's crazy. She would, she'd kill somebody without even thinking about it. And she told us that. I mean, I believe it. My mom, I watched my mom beat beat up people, and my mom was really tough. So I knew that if I told her, she would go to prison, and that I'd never see her. And I didn't want to lose my mom, so I just didn't want to tell her because I knew if I told my mom, she would kill him.
Right. That's the same thing I was faced with because my father, the second time he asked me, he said, I just want you to know you'll never have to testify. You'll never have to go to the cops. I'll take care of
Yeah,
Dennis myself. Just tell me if he's ever touched you. So, it's the same thing. I'm sure there was a part of you where they're like, yeah,
yeah,
I
I
want
want
it.
that.
And so did I. But then I'm like,
Not my mom.
what if my father gets killed in the process? What if he's got to go to prison for life? And it was just too much weight on top of what I'm already carrying to like add that burden.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't want to lose her.
All right.
She was my strength, and I thought if I lost her, I lost everything. So I didn't want to tell her. And to this day, I know my mom struggles with that pain very much so. She still struggles it living in California now, and we know he's out of prison now. My mom, I know she on a daily she struggles with that, like wanting to just make a trip out there.
Still go and
But
right or wrong.
exactly, but
Right.
because I've talked to her, I said, "Mom, you've got grandkids. Like you have things to live for. Like don't do this. Don't do it." And so I wish I would have said something to somebody.
Never
And
said a word to anybody. Classmate,
I was
teacher.
I was afraid to. I had a therapist one time when I was a child. My mom got put into a shelter because she was being beaten, and I remember this therapist was playing Candyland with me, and I think she had suspected something was going on with me, and I remember she was asking me questions that were sort of alluding to my father touching me, and then I clammed up, and I remember I got scared, and I remember in that moment I was thinking, can I trust her?
Right.
And so I just clammed up and I never told her.
I can't imagine what it had to feel like at the end of each school year and summer's here and you're getting shipped back to dad. Take just try to can you even put into words what that feeling was like?
So I became manipulative. My sister is 12 years younger than me, 11, 12 years younger than me. And I actually walked in on my dad giving my sister a bath when she was about 4 years old. It was very difficult going back to see him to answer that question. But I became, when I say manipulative, I tried to get powerful. I tried to become not afraid of him, even though everybody around us had no idea why I was being so rebellious. And he knew where that was coming from. I think he always knew. I would smoke cigarettes in front of him at 13 and 14 years old, and I just look at him like, say something. I dare you, you know. And I walked upstairs one time, and I had my bedroom because there were so many kids. My bedroom was in their room, but like in a closet they made into a room. So I went to go into my room, and I can hear him in the bathroom with my sister. And I just wanted to like peek around the corner. And when I peeked around the corner, he was messing with her. And I ran down the stairs and I got a butcher knife and I was screaming. And I came back up the stairs and I held a butcher knife at him. And he came down the stairs and I was like, I'll fucking kill you. I said, you ever touch my sister again, I'll fucking kill you. And he's like, I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything. Try to like deny it, even though I saw it.
Right.
And I definitely remember in that moment, I think I was about 16. Yeah. Oh, yeah. She's 12 years younger than me. So she's about 4 years old. So I was about 16 years old. And I remember holding like this butcher knife and just wanting to stab him, like wanting to kill him and feeling like that rage. And I don't know, I can't explain what stopped me or how I rationalized that myself out of that. Um, I found out years later, so things did happen with my sister. Um, It's awful. It's an awful situation, and for her, and whether she chooses to do anything about that, that's on her. I love her to death. I'm always here for her. It's because when I finally decided to go to the authorities and turn him in, that's when it stopped for her. And later on in life, she thanked me for that. She said, "Had you not done that, I don't know." So I did turn him in, and because he was active duty at the time, a Marine, I went through CID on military base, and then they handed over to the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps handed over to the Commonwealth of Virginia, and then I was given a lawyer, and then he went to
So take me into that. What age were you when you
when I
this
finally came
happened?
forward.
Yeah.
So I was 22. I was pregnant with my son.
And why? Why now at 22 when you're pregnant?
So I was seeing this therapist, and this therapist would ask me, like, "Have you ever considered reporting your father?" I said, "Well, no, I'm 22 now. There's, this statute of limitations. I thought there was no way to do anything about that. Who's going to believe me?" Um, and then he said, "Well, I'd like to try some hypnosis on you." Okay. I was down for anything, whatever will help. And he did hypnosis on me. I remember when I came out of it, I was like sweating really bad. Um, that day I went to work and I told my supervisor, "I have to go to CID." And he's like, "Why?" "I'm here, I'm active duty." He's like, "Why do you have to go to CID?" And I said, I have to do something now." That same day I had hypnosis, I went to CID and I said, "I have to report a sexual assault." They took me in the back.
Now he wasn't still in the military, was he?
No, he was not, but
Okay.
the incident happened while he was active duty, so therefore it goes through those channels, and that's how I was able to do that.
Huh.
I was back there for about 5 or 6 hours with the investigator and telling him, and they, of course, they want details. They want every single detail. So it was like being re-triggered again. Anyway, so yeah, he ended up, he got sentenced to, he admitted to it, and he wrote a letter. Well, so he admitted to some of it. And then he apparently wrote this letter for me, hoping that I would drop the charges. Even the CID investigator said, "Your dad wrote this letter. He would like you to read this to see if you really just think about this." And I looked at the investigator. I said, "I don't want to read that. He's manipulative. He's going to try to manipulate his way out of this, and he has to do time for what he did. Like, I'm not reading it." And I never read it. But I already know he was, "I love you and I'm so sorry," and all this stuff. Yeah, okay, whatever. Um, yeah, so and then I was 23 years old. It was June 3rd, 2000, and did I say 2022? I meant to say 2002 if I said that, but in 2002 is when I was 22 years old. And then in 2003, June 3rd, 2003, that's when he was sentenced. What I didn't know back then was if you plead guilty to a lesser crime, I don't know, something like that. Like you don't, I don't know. He pled to a lesser charge. So he actually, if you look him up, he actually is only brought up on charges for one count of sodomy. But all the other years and years of abuse and all the things that he did to me, there was not charged for none of that. So
Do they switch him from an honorable discharge to a dishonorable?
no, he maintained that.
Really?
Yeah, he maintained that. My mom keeps telling me I should take him for restitution because of all the years of therapy and trauma and everything that I've been through because of him. I don't want to have to go through any of that
Deal with
again.
him
Deal with
anymore?
he's nothing. Yeah.
So we also mentioned early on in this, you joined the Marines yourself.
Army. Yes.
Army. Okay.
I was a black sheep.
Yeah, Army, and then you had several sexual assaults in the Army.
I did right off the bat.
What age did you join the Army?
18.
So right out of high school?
Right out of high school.
How soon till the first assault?
So I joined in September 21st of 1998, and the first assault happened for me right before the 4th of July, a couple weeks before the 4th of July, probably in June of 2000 or June of 1999.
So about 9 months in.
Yep. And I was sexually assaulted by 3 people because they roofied me. I believe they roofied me because all I remember is I came to these barracks, was looking for a friend. He wasn't there. There was like some kind of barracks party going on, and I was 19, and they're like, "Hey, why don't you hang out here? He went to Nashville. He won't be back for a while, so just hang out here." And I said, "Okay." and naively just sure. And they said, "Do you want a drink?" I said, "Sure." And they handed me this beer, and that's all I remember. I woke up the next day, the sun was like coming out. I was in a bathroom and I was in a tub naked and I had blood like all over me. And I just knew as soon as I woke up that something
Blood
from my
for your
from my
vagina?
vagina, yeah, I
Uh,
had blood on me. And I just remember just like feeling pain and confusion, and I was really lethargic. Like it was really hard for me to move. I remember looking over to my right and there was multiple guys in the room laid out on the floor in the bed. And I wanted to just get out of there. So I very carefully got up out of the tub, tried to find my clothes, put my clothes back on, and I was just like really, and I was struggling to even like move because I felt so dizzy, and I put my clothes back on and I tippy-toed over guys that were on the floor. And when I walked out of the barracks, I went down the stairs and I walked down this walkway and I waved down a staff sergeant who was on staff duty. And I said, "Sergeant, Sergeant, like, I think I was sexually assaulted or raped or whatever." And he said, "Get out of these barracks. Get out of here now." And he like shooed me out of the barracks. And I had to walk about a mile and a half, 2 miles back to my barracks. And I remember feeling so ashamed and like scared and like what just happened to me. And that was awful. A couple weeks later, two of those three guys that were part of that group that did that to me, I know they did. Um, they murdered a soldier. They beat him like 30 something times in the head with a bat. He was gay and it was a hate crime and everything. To this day, and I did talk to a doctor, I went to the doctors to get tested and everything for STDs after that. And I remember telling him what happened, and he said, "I'll talk to their PA." So weird. Nothing was ever done about it. I feel like had somebody done something about it, I feel like that soldier's life would have been spared. Like he wouldn't have been killed. So that's just a whole nother spider web of stuff. But
right.
that did happen to me. That was my first sexual assault.
I mean, I don't know how it always mystifies me how like one predator can find another predator and find another like if I'm hanging out with my buddies and one of them says, "Hey, I got roofies. Let's drug a girl and rape her." I'd be like, "What did you just say?"
Yeah.
How do these guys like?
Find each other.
Yeah,
And how do they
it
find it?
just
It's crazy, right? Like
yeah,
I
it
I
mystifies me.
I mean, not to like laugh because it's not funny, but it's like it's mind-boggling if you think about it. Like what these guys did to me, and then proceeded to do to somebody else, like killed somebody together. Like, where do you find these people? Like, I don't know how. Like, this is just like I don't know. I think about that question all the time. Like, how do they find each other?
Like one of my guests, the mother's boyfriend's, raping her, and then he takes her to a house and three other guys rape her. So like what's the segue to go to your buddies and be like, "Hey, I got this 6-year-old who's great in bed. You wanna have at her?" Like, and the buddies are like, "Yeah, I'm in."
So I asked myself that question with my father and his friend, the one that was
Yeah.
recording and stuff.
Like, how do
How do
those
they how
two
do they
even
find
talk
each
about
other?
it?
And
Right.
the only thing I like I said, hindsight's 2020. I can only go off of what I can remember. And I think, and I'm just guessing, but like my father was in that pornography that I found from my father. I think that maybe at that time, maybe there was some sort of like advertisement for this kind of stuff.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe that's how they linked up. Maybe there was like a group, some kind of private thing, or
So
maybe
this
there's
pornography wasn't just like a Playboy.
it was
It
I
was
remember it was really brutally, like it was brutal. Like it wasn't like Playboy or yeah, it wasn't like Playboy or anything. It wasn't even like Hustler. I mean, it was just like it was the kind of stuff that it's very uncomfortable to look at. And I just remember that.
this first assault. It wasn't your only assault in the military.
I've had quite a few.
And just take me through a couple others.
Yeah, I don't like to discuss too much about that detail because I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that yet.
Okay.
But there was a senior officer who ended up becoming a field grade officer who sexually assaulted me. He was a commander. And so I was a young soldier at the time, and I was afraid to do or say anything to defend myself.
Right.
And so I just did what he asked me to do, similar to kind of when I was a kid. I just did what I was told,
Yeah.
and I thought that would be it, that if I just gave him what he wanted and he would leave me alone, but that didn't happen. And
So this became an ongoing thing.
yeah, he multiple times. And then I just remember like just not like it was almost like I just let it happen because I was so afraid to say anything because he would threaten me with my career. Like, oh, I can kick you out of the military. He used to say that to me all the time. I can kick you out. Um, Fast forward, I'm in Iraq. This is years later. I'm in Iraq and I'm in a whole nother organization. I did have the same last name. I was going through a divorce, so I still had that name. And I got a phone call on one of the CP, like in my CP on one of the phones we had in there. And I answered it. And he said, he's called me by my last name. And he says, do you remember me? This is Major so and so at the time. And I froze. So, they say you have flight or fight or freeze. I freeze. I don't like run and try to evade, like run away from something. And I
Yeah,
don't like
me
fight.
too,
Well,
unfortunately.
I do fight sometimes, but I'm more of like a freeze where I just kind of like don't move.
Right.
And I remember I was standing there just like frozen, and I knew instantly when I heard his voice who he was. And he says, "You don't remember me? I almost kicked you out of the army." And I just remember I had the courage to just say, "Don't ever call me here again." And I hung up the phone. And I used to work for this unit in the army where I could like go in and like change my name, my last name. And because I was going through a divorce, legally, separated, I had filed for divorce and everything. I changed my last name to my stepdad's last name, hoping that he wouldn't be able to find me. I had never heard from him after that. But could you imagine just like years later, like this was probably about 5 or 6 years after, like,
And you're all the way in
and I'm in
Iraq.
Iraq, and this guy, he was in Iraq. So that's how he was able to. And when you're in the military, you can see names and on emails and phone numbers and stuff. So like he probably looked me up. It was like, oh, she's in Iraq. Let me call her with no,
Ready to abuse you again.
sure, or yeah, and manipulate me.
Right.
Because he's a becoming a field grade officer, you have more power and more control at the time. He retired out of the military as I believe a lieutenant colonel or colonel.
Wow.
Yeah. So
And does that end your sexual assaults or
So actually meeting my husband now, that's when I stopped getting sexually harassed and had sexual assault issues. Yeah, there. So I say issues because sexual assault meaning like grab me on my bottom or breasts or like, grope me, things like that. Those are also forms of sexual
did you
assault.
meet him in the military?
I met him in Iraq. So
And how soon into meeting him are you telling him your story?
So we met in Iraq a couple of times. We were just friends. And then when we came back from deployment, we ran into each other and we instantly started dating, and we've been together since. But I told him right off the bat, probably within the first 48 hours, I said, look, I need to tell you something.
It didn't scare him away.
And I said, you got to know who I am. You got to know this happened to me. On my personal, my growing up as a child, this happened to me, and it is a lot to unfold to someone you're like just getting to know.
Of course.
But I didn't want this to be something that, because guys can get put off by that. Not just men, women, I'm sure too. But I, I just figured, hey, if this is as passionate as it seems it is, and like if we're gonna get into this, like I think we're going, then you need to know me.
Right.
And so I just told him right off the bat everything. I just laid it all out, how many people I've slept with, um, all the things. And he just like, I don't care. I want to be with you. And he's had a lot to unfold too with me about his life. And so we've been there for each other. Ever since I've been with my husband, I felt safe and secure. I felt like, he'll protect me. Everywhere I go, he's like my protector, knight in shining armor. He's the man that saves me from, you know,
And when did you finally tell your mother?
I told her when I was 19 years old on the 4th of July when I confronted my father for the first time. So, but I just called her on the phone when I got back to Tennessee where I was stationed. And I said, Mom, I have to tell you something. And I just told her. And, well, initially I said, I confronted my dad. He hurt me. She says, well, what do you mean? Did he hit you? I said, no. She's like, well, she like named a couple other things, and then she got quiet. And she said, "Did he sexually hurt you?" And I said, "Yeah." And she, I think, dropped the phone. And
And was that really the first time, like, confronting your dad? Is that the first time you're like breaking out of your silence
it
and then
was.
telling your mother? Is she the second one, really? And
Well, so when I finally broke the silence on that, my brothers were actually standing to my left-hand side when I confronted my dad. My stepmother heard. So it was just my stepmother and my two brothers at that time that heard the whole argument, and my ex-boyfriend, who is the one that pushed me to confront him. And and when I confronted him, I just, I said everything you could possibly think of to him. "You're dead to me. You sexually assaulted me for years. I had to keep my mouth shut. I hate you. Like, I wish you were never my father. Like, don't ever try to contact me. I will go to the authorities." Like, I was just everything you could possibly think of that I've wanted to say to him for years. I said, "I've always hated you. I hated being in the car with you alone. I hated being anywhere with you alone. I hate you." Like, I was just saying all the things I've wanted to say to him. And he was crying. And he was crying. He said, "I'm so sorry." He goes, "My mom did it to me, you know." And I said, "Well, I'm breaking the cycle because
and
you're
this was
not
in
getting
front of
my
your
brothers
brothers
and my
and his wife
stepmother."
at the time.
And she was like, "Jim, what is she talking about? What is she talking about?" You know, she stayed with him.
She did.
So,
She's
yeah.
still with him.
Yeah, that's another thing I don't understand. You hear about people who do these things, and then the wives or spouses stay with them. And it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
are you kidding me? Or they'll
Right.
defend them.
Right.
I just, it's mind-boggling to me, but that's their own hell. They can live in that. I don't care.
Yeah.
It's
I mean, my very first guest I had on here, Michelle, uh, she was 6 at the time, and her mother walk in on the stepdad getting oral from their 3-year-old sister. And the mother grabs her hand and yanks her out of the room. And she's like, "Mommy, we have to help her. We have to help her." And the mother slaps her and tells her to keep her mouth shut. And then, and the same thing's happening to Michelle. Uh, but they just, happen to walk in on the 3-year-old having the same thing done. And so like, how does a mother do that? It's
so
mind boggling.
so the recent the Lyle and Eric Menendez
Yeah.
story. Okay.
Everybody wants me to
So
comment on that.
now, so
I
when
haven't watched it
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yet.
So, but when it first came out, I distinctively remember Eric Menendez, I think is the brother, was on stand and he was bawling. And I remember watching how he was so afraid to talk about it. And the people ridiculed them and said, "You're just using that as an excuse." But I remember then thinking, I believe him. I believe him because I've been there before. I know what that feels like to want to take your parent's life. I've been in that position before. And I think you kind of have to, it's very difficult for somebody to even fathom or imagine how that feels. And back on the mother situation, they killed their mom. Allegedly, the mom knew the whole time, all these years, and she let it happen and she just didn't do anything. And she just basically like blamed the boys for what they've been through. I believe that. When the murder happened, it was so brutal that it had to have been personal. There had to have been some rage there, a lot of rage. And so I'm not saying that they should have taken that path, because if you listen to them now, they say, if I can go back in time, I wouldn't have done that. I would have gone to the authorities. I would have reported it the correct way and whatever. I get it. But they were also very young too.
Right.
But I also understand.
Yeah. Well, obviously I
Yeah.
understand. I mean, I
So,
was, I faced a life sentence. I was blessed to get the sentence I did. I had a woman reach out to me a few weeks ago. Her brother's doing life for killing their father because the father was molesting him.
mm,
This other girl in Pennsylvania just sent me an article of this guy who just killed his abuser, and they're charging him with first-degree murder. He saw the guy. He had gone to the cops several times, and they did nothing. And he saw the guy on his riding lawnmower, and he stopped with a shotgun, got out, and killed him. And
that's
he put the gun down and drove to the police and said, "I just killed my abuser."
that's the part of the judicial system that I don't.
Oh, it's
It's
infuriating.
infuriating.
Yeah.
It's just how do you protect yourself and others? Because I think at that point, even when you're an adult, it's not even just about you that you're trying to protect, because you may already be in a position of protection. It's wanting to protect others. And so, yeah, but I'm in a much better place now. I feel like mentally I've done a lot to get there. Um,
And
I,
how far removed are you from, when you confronted your father? Like, is it 10 years past now, 15, 20 years? How long ago was the confrontation and when you filed charges? How,
so 2002
2002. All right. So
when
yeah,
when I
so 20 years.
yeah, 20.
To wrap this up, what has gotten you sane? What's gotten you past your rage? What keeps you in a healthy place?
There's a lot of factors there, and intensive outpatient program was the best therapy for me. It may not work for everybody in their schedules, but it worked good for me. I finally checked into that, and I did it every day for almost 2 months. I got intensive therapy, group therapy, had to unfold everything and all the things that I kept in. My diet, I adjusted my diet. I went to AA meetings, and I I'd struggled with alcoholism too. So I cut back on that completely. I actually quit drinking for a long period of time, and now I'm able to just like socially, like just once in a while, like have a drink, and that's it. And I'm okay with that. But I don't rely on that to make me feel good. I go to the gym all the time. I love going to the gym. Fitness for me is my therapy.
Me
So
too.
yeah, I feel like getting on the cardio machine or doing weights or whatever, like staying fit, active, going on a bike ride, going on a hike, doing all the active things, sports, all that stuff. I love it. Yoga. Yoga is amazing. Yoga taps into a part of my brain that I didn't even think I can get to. And it really has helped me out with like calming myself down and relaxing. Meditative yoga I'd recommend, especially if you're starting off. Like I get it, it's difficult, but the meditative yoga is really good.
In jail, we started a bunch of us doing yoga. So we had a section. We had a top and bottom tier, and we would go up to the top tier, and there was like a big oval area. And me and this guy Ricky Bobby and
Ricky Bobby.
Ricky Bobby.
That's funny.
Poor Ricky's not with us anymore. He died of a heroin overdose. But me, him, and three other guys. We were doing yoga every day for quite a while.
I mean, it works.
Yeah.
So, and I think it just helps. Anything that don't use substances and stuff like that. I would never. I get it why people go to that. I get it, because they're looking for a quick fix to
Right.
just numb themselves. And anyway, but I would just stay away from substances. Period. Marijuana was for me for a while was a good go-to. But even then, I just say try to do things on a clear mind and
Right.
a clear head, and get to know yourself, get to know who you are, because you lose yourself in those events, and the trauma and childhood trauma and abuse and all that. You tend to lose yourself, and because you go into protective mode. So anything that can help you kind of let that guard down and just process things and unlearn those maladaptive behaviors, and learn to communicate appropriately, learn to trust. It helps. You'll never, I'm gonna say never. I hate to use absolute terms, right? I think struggling, with triggers is probably going to be a lifelong thing for me. Every day but it's learning how to process those moments in a healthy way without going, oh my God, I need to get a drink. Give me a shot. So yeah, I think it's therapy. Start there. Yeah.
Well, I've had 3 therapists starting in prison, and then 2 since I got out of prison. But my last one, because I was going to do. Did you do EMDR? Did you ever do
I
that?
did not, but they recommended that for me because I had really bad nightmares too. So they said EMDR would be good for that.
Well, before you do EMDR, we did a trauma timeline, and we spent like 9 months doing my trauma timeline.
Because you'll start adding things later on and go, oh, I forgot about this one. And
Well, she would write it down, but like we would, as I'm mentioning my earliest trauma that I can remember, then we're discussing it and pulling it apart, and there's been a lot of trauma. So it took 9 months to get through it, you know? And then I had other trauma during that trauma, you know, like finding my brother dead on our kitchen floor.
I'm
Uh,
sorry.
you know, so it's just, it took, you know, closer to a year to just get through my trauma timeline,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, yeah. When I watched your video, it was, like I said, it was very relatable. And I was deleting my Instagram, by the way, when I found your
Really?
page. I was in the process of deleting everything because I just was tired of social media, and your video popped up, and I don't know why, I just felt compelled to watch it. And as I was watching it, I went, "Oh my gosh, this guy gets it. Like, this guy knows what I'm feeling." It's very rare that I've come across people that I trust enough to talk to about these things and to share my story. But to hear someone say, like, you did the thing I always wanted to do, but I'm glad I didn't.
Right.
Okay. But at the same time, I get it because I've been there. I know what that feels like to be in that moment. Um and I like what you're doing because it's not just from a woman's perspective. And don't get me wrong, like I love that anybody comes forward and talks about it, but hearing a man talk about their abuse and talk about that openly, that's huge. And that'll make a lot more changes out there to people feeling compelled to talk, because when we talked about it in the beginning, but
Yeah.
it's difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm booked through the end of the year already, taking stuff for
That's good.
January. You know, like because people just like they relate. They're like, all
Yeah.
right, he gets it, whether male or female,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you know, you know, unless they have a movie or a book they're promoting and they want bigger audience than what I have, it's really about just finding someone who really gets what they've been through and they feel comfortable opening up to, and
Sure.
that's I'm the person for most people like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And even and this is how you start. This is where you start. So
yeah.
that's good.
Well, we did it. You got through
Yay.
it.
High five.
I saw
We did it.
I saw your eyes get glistening a little, which is normal, but
Sure.
you didn't break down, which that would have been normal too. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, so many people come in here and they're like, "Oh, I hope I can get through this." I'm like, "You're talking about the most horrible thing that's happened to you in your life. It's normal to break down, so don't feel awkward." But you did a great job,
Just
and
remember to breathe. It's
yeah,
like my allergies may have gotten to me a little bit on the podcast, so I apologize to the listeners. I'm sniffling, but
no.
yeah.
You know, to come on here and to say my father anally raped me and make
Yeah.
me have to give him oral to get a bike is it's just unbelievable. It really
Yeah.
is. Like these people are just
Yeah.
they have zero humanity. Like
Mm-mm.
you know, like and I say long before I killed Dennis Pegg, his humanity was gone. I killed a wild animal basically.
Yeah.
You can't be human and making your 4-year-old daughter give you oral just so she can get a bike. You're not human. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like and there's something off with them. Like how your dad how he can live with himself. Like why he hasn't tasted a bullet up from his own hand. Like cuz they're not built right. They're
No.
not they don't feel the shame we feel. They don't
Psychopaths
yeah, they're off.
they lack empathy, or I would say he's more of a sociopath. So there's some level, I think, of empathy, or he knows how to manipulate and to make people think he feels for you. But he's definitely at some level like a sociopath, because he obviously, I'm not the only person, but like, I mean, he's a serial like
Pedophile predator.
rapist.
Yeah.
Sure.
Wow. Thank you,
Wow.
Kate.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. All right, everybody. There's another. I feel like I need to shower after these episodes. I just like
Stresses you out.
yes. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Support our guests by tuning in and giving them strength for coming forward. And we'll see you next week. Peace.